let's hit it. Greetings all. Happy Halloween. Welcome to Terra Prime Live. Dark Anonymous coming to you from Terra Prime headquarters. Today we are going to have a special Halloween chat on the Darkside. And it's a perfect night for that here in the greater Detroit area or in southwestern Michigan. If you know, Devil's Night is quite the night. And joining me here is another Michigander, John Solomon. How's it going, John?
Good.
All right. Yes. So yes, it is Devil's Night here in Michigan, and I don't know how it's celebrated elsewhere in the country, but we have had. I don't know if the tradition I think has stopped, but if you grew up in the 70s and 80s, there was a tradition of, shall we say, uncontrolled bonfires.
Up in my neck of the woods up here around the Flint area, we certainly had our issues with that, but also mostly it was just a chance for teenagers, young teens, to go out and be slight ne'er-do-wells with, unfavorable decorations in people's yards and things like that. That was classic.
Yes, a little dabbling in the dark side.
Yes,
right. So, and that's what we're here to talk about. Here to talk about the dark side as we know it in Star Wars lore and all that. It's obviously leached into popular culture in general, right? Everybody says, there's the whole idiom of join the dark side, do the thing that you don't really want to do, but you want to do it. Yes. So there you go. The dark side. We'll be taking questions, so go ahead and throw them in the chat. Hello to Roberto, who's in the chat. So yeah, when Star Wars came out, in the very first moments of that whole movie where we meet Obi-Wan and Luke and all of that, we get introduced to the Force, and then right after that get introduced to the dark side of the Force. And then the dark side is what corrupted Darth Vader later on and all that. Now it gets a little bumpy right there in the original trilogy, because we remember the first movie wasn't made as a first movie to a trilogy. It was kind of like made as an isolated movie, and then he got the chance to expand it. And so there are some things with the concept that I think are a little tricky through there, but it is of course expanded through the games and all that, and it shows us the birth of the Sith, right? So now we have Jedi, we have Sith, and the Sith didn't exist in the original trilogy. We can talk a little bit about that, but obviously they exist now, and they're very popular characters. When anybody gets a lightsaber and stuff like that, very many people go Sith. Probably because of the black, I'm assuming. Yeah,
the black is popular, but Luke wears black.
Yeah, I know.
Right?
I know.
I think a little bit of his the popularity of the Sith and the idea of the dark side is indulging in, right? Because ultimately, what we kind of figure out, and I'm jumping way ahead, but power, right? Mm-hmm. For the Sith, it's all about personal power and power to influence things, and that's and selfishness, right? That's George talks about that a little bit about the dark side. And so I think that's the attraction, right? This idea of exuding power and taking power for yourself, which, there's lots of self-help people that would thoroughly endorse people going to the dark side if it empowers them to succeed in their life.
Yes, right. And not the genre jump here, but if you watched She-Hulk, the thing, there is that whole plot line with the Abomination, which is sort of like that. Right. Self-help can easily be depending on who the audience is, right? You can take the same rhetoric and apply it to that. But so, yeah, I mean, that's a good point. You know, do we like to indulge in our selfish nature, right? They talk about the quick and easy way is always attractive, and you know, all that kind of thing. And then of course in combat and with lightsabers, it's about, you know, being
Aggressive.
aggressive and all that. And we've talked a lot about how that's, you know, that's very difficult to actually pull off in reality, and that you'd have to kind of take a little bit of a different skew on that idea.
Yeah.
And we can get into our own ideas about what the dark side is and whatnot. But yeah, but we'll just throw all the stuff out there. We've got lots of media to go through. We got Clone Wars, we got Rebels, we got, you know, all this stuff. So all of this stuff that used to be kind of, you know, nebulous is now actually getting played with, because the people who are doing the stuff are us now. So yeah, so lore as far as the dark side goes, what are you were looking up some lore. Where do we, I mean, obviously chronologically we start with the first movie, but you know, within the universe and how it, you know, how is the dark side portrayed and all that kind of stuff.
In the greater legends, and I might be a little mistaken about this, but the oldest known civilization was the Rakatan Empire, and these are weird aliens with two eye stalks and cone heads and a weird little mouth and kind of no nose. They're very strange looking. They show up occasionally in some of the old Republic video games as this legendary stuff, and or as just ancient bad guys. And they were significant. They had a force using empire that was dark side specifically, not Sith. They weren't a particular religion of Sith. Because the Sith is like a particular sect of dark side force users, and they're actually born out of, follow the comic book history, whether that's current or legends now. They were a group of exiled Jedi that dabbled in the force, that dabbled in the dark side too much, and the council decided, originally the Jedi, right, in legends were kind of striving for balance between light and dark, and they eventually realized that you can't, because like selfish nature kind of wins out, you know, most of the time. So they kind of banned dark side force use, and this group of Jedi were exiled for that. They landed on a planet, and basically through their physical prowess and abilities with force, dominated the local culture and became the Lords of the Sith, which is, I guess, where the term comes from. They established their own sect, and moving forward, that's the history of their dark side use. They dabbled in crazy, unusual powers, from alchemy to cloning, right? Which I think we're starting to see inklings of in the newer stuff, right? That there's
Right,
you know, dark. What was the line? Dark sorcery, you know, Sith alchemy, dark sorcery. Who knows, right?
Right. Somehow Palpatine returned.
Right, exactly. And then we have a Hobbit give us, you know, and to be fair, for all the things that I do and don't like about the newer movies, and there's lots of both, that's as much as an explanation as we got in any of the original trilogy on anything.
Oh yeah,
right? I mean, so you know, so I'm not bashing on that entirely, but I do love the idea that they at least acknowledge this legends and comic book reference to the dark side being a pathway to many powers that people, the Jedi, find unnatural, which is exactly as Palpatine described it in, you know, in the prequels.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And yeah, so I mean, you have that, but I think too, especially in the movies, and you know, yeah, the new movies are kind of an issue just narratively, because now they don't go together, right? It's like the third movie just erased the second movie. So I don't understand it at all.
Yeah.
So it's very, very confusing.
But we do see, interestingly enough, in that movie, we see that if we take that as canon, and it is, in Rise of Skywalker, we see the dark side use abilities that are life draining, which
Mhm.
is which is very interesting. That's something we haven't really seen before. I mean, Palpatine straight up draws the life energy from spoiler alert, uh for
Yeah.
Rise of Skywalker, sorry, draws energy from the dyad, from their bond in the Force,
Right.
to reinvigorate his physical body. That's a pretty dark power. Uh, not just shooting lightning, right? Which
Right. And if we take that, and we'll see where they take it in these new series and stuff like that, but having the dark side, I've always thought of the dark side as not something as easily, talked about, right? Like, why does the dark side give you these powers and stuff like that? Why is this a dark side power? Why is it not, or whatever? Like, so the healing aspect of things, right? Force healing. Why haven't we seen this a whole lot? It's probably because it's technically a dark side power, because you're dealing with life energy, right? And it's easy to give it, but it's just as easy to suck it right out of the person, right? So if you're going to talk about things that give you the temptation for going bad, right, that's one of them. And that's where you have that good yang aspect kind of intertwined with the yin aspect.
absolutely. In fact, wow, okay. So honestly, I have to admit, I really haven't read a lot of comic books, a lot of the
Yeah,
Star Wars
yeah, I
comics, because
haven't
there's years and
either.
years.
I'm going mostly on the visual media.
But in the legacy comics, which again are legends now, Cade Skywalker, uh, the ancestor of I'm guessing Rey now. I mean, I don't know. At the time, it was Luke's ancestor, but we currently don't know if any descendants Luke specifically has. But he has a innate force ability to resurrect,
Right.
to bring life back. And it's considered in the comic book very dangerous dark side power, because he has to tap
Mhm.
deeply into the dark side, into his raw and mostly negative emotions to develop that power. And he does it a couple times, and it causes a lot of strife for the character. And the character is very, as you follow him through, he's very, very much walks the line of good and bad, as any
Mhm.
good, protagonist needs to appeal to a younger generation.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes. Yeah. Exactly.
And to have the struggle, right? I mean, that's part of the hero's journey. You have to have the temptation, right? You have to
Mhm.
have the temptation to do the wrong thing for whatever reason. So the dark side exists as a construct within the great mythology of Star Wars, as the temptation for the easy way.
Right.
I mean, Luke didn't have to, he could have joined Vader and fought the Emperor together, and overthrown him that way, rather than trying to redeem Vader. And that would have been probably a little easier, maybe. I'm guessing.
Mhm.
Who knows, right? Vader certainly thought it was a good plan. But again, Vader's, super steeped in all of his failures, right? When at
Right.
that point, when you look at it from not just the original trilogy, but yet in the prequels, and Anakin's fall to the dark side, because he craved the power that he couldn't have, or that he didn't have, or just fate doesn't allow you to take everything within your own power.
Well, I think more so than that, and what I think made the Clone Wars so interesting is Anakin. I don't think was. I don't think Anakin was after the power, right? I think Anakin, especially now with the Obi-Wan series afterward, and with all of this new information that we got, Anakin just wants the control aspect of things, right? Could he get everything under control, right? Because if you watch the Clone Wars, you see that he doesn't like the capriciousness of politicians. He doesn't like the the corruption, all of these things, which are all good things to dislike, you know. But that makes him fall towards more of the law and order things like Tarkin and, that kind of thing. So the whole lesson, I think, again, now that it is being back informed by new material, you go back to that first movie, and those things have much more weight to them. At first, when the Revenge of the Sith came out, at first it was really funny because it's just like, what happened to my father? Oh yes, I left him for dead on the shores of a lava river. After he killed a bunch of kids. But I think they've done a good job of kind of meeting those.
Absolutely. Kenobi really, the Kenobi series really ensconces Anakin's willful acceptance of the dark side, right? And just choosing to like really dive into that. And that informs very well, right? A plot hole cleaned up with a little stitching, right? Or whatever it is, however you want to look at it. It does a really good job of marrying Obi-Wan's attitude in A New Hope to the end, right? Where we saw him at the end of the movie. Right. And also gives Obi-Wan a lot of closure. We say all kinds of good things about the Kenobi series because I loved it.
Oh yeah, no, it was fantastic. It was
very good.
And especially these issues like we're talking about with the dark side. Obi-Wan goes into exile and he's so terrified of falling to the dark side, that he just gives everything up. Right. And you can flash forward to Last Jedi and you see Luke do the same thing. I personally, even though the movie itself, and I've said this before, structurally and all that kind of stuff doesn't work for me, the things they did that they set up in Last Jedi, I actually very much liked. I liked the way they approached Luke. I liked, the way they approached the Force. I liked all of that going forward. And of course, it doesn't matter anymore.
Right.
But anyway, yes. When Obi-Wan says, the lure of the dark side and all that, what is that lure? And this is the other thing too. Like you said, Anakin's a willing follower of the dark side. So basically, he's a true believer. If we have the cult leader who knows the game in Palpatine, right, and you basically have the true believer who's completely brainwashed into this, but that still means that he's basically fighting something in him to just say, nope, I'm going this direction, right? It's not a natural course of action for him, which I think sets up his redeemability. Like when the prequels came out, his fall was just like, what? That didn't much care. When Clone Wars filled in that gap, I think the Obi-Wan series fills in, so you've got his rise, you've got his fall, and then you've got his redemption at the end. All of it makes really good narrative sense.
Absolutely.
Forever. But that's the thing, the stereotype is that the baddies, they just want to be bad for being bad's sake, right? I just want to be evil, and it's something. It's like, what's the appeal there? Now we know what the appeal of the dark side is. I think much better. And we can see that. And with the Andor thing, even though they're not explicitly going into dark side, light side, all of that kind of thing, the fact that everything is so gray amongst the people, really, really underscores that particular note that, yes, they're all rebels, but they are not all the same.
And this is also, I thought, very well echoed in the first few episodes of The Mandalorian, right? Mandalorian very quickly becomes light and dark, right? Which is classic Star Wars storytelling. But when we first meet him, is like he's, easily the first to fight and kill, right? Which is kind of dark sidey, right? I mean, they even tried to polish out Han, willing to kill somebody that was about to shoot them, right? Because he didn't shoot first, right? They kind of
Right.
polished that out of the story, which is whatever, right? That's
Mhm.
I don't. But you know, Mando in the first couple things had no problem doing whatever he needed to do to get his situation done. And
Oh
it's
yeah.
only, and you can argue that it's only because the asset is a child, right, that has no will of its own, that he ultimately sees a kinship in his situation, which is, I think, obviously the point of the story, but that he is very gray, willing to do whatever, right, work for the empire that destroyed his people, right, to get the Beskar because it's payday, and
Mhm.
and his clan needs it,
Yeah.
whatever it takes, right, to willing to turn against everything he's done to for the right thing, and ultimately willing to face anything for it. And we see that through the two seasons. And so the gray, I think, very strong. The more gray, and my wife would love me saying this, right?
Yeah.
Because she prefers much more sophistication. And whereas I'm classic white hat, black hat cowboys, right?
Yeah.
Uh, the more gray you have, and the more you characters are stuck in there and they have to make their choice one way or the other, then the I think the more potent the story is when you are dealing with just the white and the black, right? The good guys and the bad guys. For me, anyway, and that's in that, to the dark side point, Palpatine's long-term machinations, right, and political guile, and of course, right, there's all kinds of Lucas's personal opinions wrapped up in the fact that, like, the
Right.
super evil Sith guy is a politician, right?
Mhm.
Uh, Not that I necessarily disagree with him, but the his long term machinations to take over the empire, or to take over the republic and turn it into an empire, I think are probably secondary to his long term goal of desire of revenge against the perceived revenge against the Jedi for
Yes.
his religious sect, right? For his personal group of the Sith. I think
Right.
his whole goal was simply to, the fact that he ends up in power fulfills the maniacal, mustache twirling aspect of his
Right.
personality, and he clearly has that, right?
Right.
For whatever reason, his desire to rule, to have power, to see things the way he wants it. But I think, yeah, specifically his long term goal was simply destroying the Jedi because they were the enemy of his people.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think also too, you're talking about Mando, we can talk about Andor, any of these non-force related characters or whatever, they go through the same struggle. They go, or whatever. You've got Mando who's just all business. He doesn't pretty much ruthless. In the first 5 minutes of the show, he bisects somebody,
With a
you
door.
know. So so you're not in PG-13 or G-rated territory here, but when he sees Grogu, and you don't know when he does see him, but after a while you understand that he sees kinship with him. He's a foundling, yada yada yada. um and you go through that. So you start with somebody who's doing deeds which might be considered dark side, right? He's killing, he's doing all this for selfish personal gain, whatever. Yet when he comes into contact with Grogu and with something to care for, he steps up there. So I think the white hat, black hat thing can kind of coexist within the gray, because the white hat, black hat thing, again, that's a really good metaphor, because we put the hats on ourselves,
Absolutely.
right? And so whatever the reality of the situation is, and I think this is what they're doing so well in the Star Wars universe right now, right? Everybody says, "Oh, post Disney Star Wars is so bad." I totally disagree. I think it's so much better because they've now flushed out this kind of world for everything for like this to just exist, you know, so that you can just set things here and it's already a kind of, you know, cohesive place and idea, you know, and all of that. So you can have people thinking and being set up as black hat, white hat. And again, Andor's a perfect example where you find yourself rooting for the Imperials, for that lady. You're like, yeah, wait a second. No, bad. You know, but narratively, right, you get caught up in that thing. She's going through a struggle, you know, you end up just relating to her.
Yep, absolutely.
For those scenes and for that thing. Now, when they get together with the heroes, that will be interesting because now you've built up a relationship with this character.
Yep. And she's just trying to do her job, and she's trying to do her job the best way she can for what she perceives as like the right side of justice, right?
Right.
And you can relate to that, right? It's easy buy-in. And then you remember like, oh, she's wearing an ISB uniform, right? It's like, you know, it's like, oh, that's, you know, but she's trying hard, and she's, you know, and she's a maverick, right? That's the other thing, right? Is something Star Wars fans love is somebody that goes against the system, right? She's willing to fight the Imperial bureaucracy to get the results she needs to get.
Right.
So yes, I
for the agree. Imperial bureaucracy, but
right, make it stronger.
But that's what, you know, I realized that last week we were watching and I just said, wait a second, why am I rooting for her? Like, she's the one who pretty much, you know, made everything as bad as it was.
Yep.
But spoilers if you haven't seen Andor, but yes. I don't think anybody this deep into a Darkside program has not watched Andor.
Right. Or at least doesn't I mean, we're not being super, you know.
No.
I was about to say something that might have given Ben a little bit more of a spoiler, but I won't. But suffice to say that Andor is very good. If you haven't watched it, go check it out. Yes.
But just the treatment of the dark side, right? Of good and evil, right? And you start to see the depth, like I said, adding content, just like Rogue One added content to Leia and Vader's exchange at the beginning of Star Wars, right? Where she's saying, "I don't know what you're talking about." He's like, I literally just flew away from your ship, you know? And so now you get it, right? And so that adds content. I think that like Obi-Wan and all that stuff, they did the same thing for the Obi-Wan character, where you can see a depth. There's that simple kind of phrase. You now have all of this example of, you know, what does it mean? Like everybody says, oh, Darkseid is giving into your emotions. Well, what does that mean? Does that mean giving into sadness? Because I don't think anybody would have a problem giving into sadness or crying or something like that. What it means is you try to eliminate yourself from the equation, you know, and it's more of like, don't just do the things you like or want to do, you know, or that seem to come naturally to you, because there will always be times that you have to do something horrible, you know, for you or whatever.
Speaking of horrible things.
Oh, yes.
Should we delve into a little bit of the powers of the dark side?
Ooh,
things that we see the dark side force users do in various media that lightsiders either shun or explicitly,
right.
disavow.
Yes. That's a good one. Obviously, force lightning is probably the most obvious one. I don't think we've ever seen a Jedi yet use force lightning, have we?
No, the closest we've seen is when
Ray.
Ray does it, but she does it instinctually, and you
Right.
can make all the arguments that she's never learned how to do it,
Right.
was never trained, and was Yoda in the Battle of Palpatine. He kind of absorbs it and then shoots it back at him as like a ball of force. But
That's
that's more absorption, right? Which he does to Dooku,
right.
right? He just absorbs Dooku's force lightning.
Right.
But
So it basically took
the energy,
force
right?
lightning and back. So it was more like a Tai Chi. Give the energy back to the opponent kind of thing.
Yeah, force lightning is definitely the signature move of the Sith, for sure,
Yes.
right? It's we see Palpatine and Dooku both utilize it to great effect in various things.
Now,
Media.
before we go on to other force powers, which may be more obscure, here's my question that I've had for quite some time. Why is the Jedi mind trick not considered a dark side power?
That is an interesting question.
Because that seems like preying on the weak-minded.
It sure does. Because it only works on the weak-minded, right?
Right.
However, maybe for I mean, George could give his reasoning. I would say maybe it's because the intention of the power is to avoid violent conflict, right? It's like, sure, Obi-Wan could have jumped out of the land speeder and just chopped up all the stormtroopers, but where would that have got him?
But if we go back to the whole, force healing and all that kind of stuff, what's to stop them from going, shoot your compatriots,
And in fact, Ezra does exactly that in the Rebels.
Yeah, exactly.
And Kanan is like, doesn't, right? Kanan being just a Padawan as far as training goes, isn't sure whether that's a good thing or a bad thing.
Right.
Whether or not it was appropriate use of the power, and he should be scolded or he should be congratulated for being clever and saving their lives. So that's an interesting, but also right to the idea of Qui-Gon recently, Tales of the Jedi, right? It brought this to my mind. Qui-Gon's attempted use to basically hoodwink and scam Watto. Is Watto's like, I can't spend Republic credits out here; they're useless. No, you'll take them anyway. You're getting something. It ain't. So he's basically trying to steal from this junk dealer.
Yeah,
and that's one of the issues that a lot of people often. Speaking of gray hats and gray things, a lot of people want to assign the gray Jedi moniker to Qui-Gon because George originally in a comment about the character said that he's willing to do morally gray things, right? Well, morally gray actions is maybe a little bit different than being willing to dabble in the dark side, which we never see Qui-Gon actually do. Right? Anything we quote note as dark side. In fact, in one of the more recent novels, he quite vehemently gets into an argument with another Jedi about sticking to the light side.
Yeah, I always thought that the roles in Phantom Menace between Qui-Gon Jinn and Obi-Wan should have been reversed. Right?
Obi-Wan should have been more the Maverick.
Went into the town, found this kid, assumed he was the chosen one. He was on his first mission or something. He's assumed he was the chosen one. Ends up betting their ship in a local race, and then Qui-Gon Jinn can be back at the ship going, what the. This is your first time out, and you found the chosen one. You bet the Queen's ship on a race starring a kid.
It does. It certainly does. It seemed much more like something eager to prove himself Padawan would do rather than a seasoned Jedi Knight.
Yeah, it does. But yeah, but you get I even forgot about the Tales of the Jedi. Which is definitely interesting, especially when you look at Count Dooku, because there's a guy.
Spoiler alert! It's very good.
Very interesting.
Go check it out if you haven't seen it yet.
Yeah, it is. But it's very, very interesting exploration of somebody's fall. Definitely. Yep. We won't spoil it, but
but
all right. More obscure dark side powers.
Sith alchemy and dark sorcery. These a couple of these things are hinted at in Rise of Skywalker. Like you and I had mentioned before the show started, but there's actually a small chapter on Sith alchemy and the way of the Sith. If anybody has seen this yet, it's very interesting. There's some creation of creatures is in monstrous Sith, and imbuing of physical objects is quite common amongst Sith sorcery.
And that happened a lot in Rebels.
Yes,
they came upon a lot of force imbued objects. Yep. And things that were kind of like cursed.
Beyond just the holocrons, which are just reservoirs of knowledge, right? That have some force sensitive activation, right? They have some interaction with the force.
Well, even the Sith holocron had that aspect to it. It wasn't just the information,
right?
Like it unlocked the whole temple, and like touching it even could screw you up.
Yeah, my understanding is they're powered by kyber crystals, right? That's kyber crystals, and of course kyber crystals are force sensitive, or they're somehow involved in the force, whether they're sentient or not, which is one of the little things they kind of dabble at occasionally. Alchemy, force imbuing of objects, that's a creation of creatures. There's the Tentarac and several other Sith abominations. The entire species of Masasi were genetically engineered by the Sith as warriors. It might be strongly noted that like the temple in the original Star Wars that the rebels are using a base is a Masasi temple on Yavin 4. That was the home of the Masasi people. They were genetically and magically altered by ancient Sith to serve as warriors, and they're long dead by the time we get to the current canon of Star Wars. But that's a bunch of legend stuff that goes into that. Again, stuff that's kind of around and kicking during the time of the Old Republic video games. So anybody that plays SOTOR like me for the last 10 years or so will be well acquainted with those types of things, weird magics that just come purely out of the Sith. Well, we're on the Sith. The path between worlds we see in the Rebels. Clearly Palpatine knew it existed. He couldn't access it. He didn't know how. He was trying, which we see in like one of the near finales of Rebels. Ezra accidentally lets him in, which causes all kinds of weird havoc, right? With time traveling and all kinds of other things. But you clearly see Palpatine doing some type of a ritual to see into the world. He's got like a fire and he's doing things, and it clearly looks like a magical ritual, like in a European tradition, I would say. What we perceive as classic Dungeons and Dragons, evil magic or whatever.
I think one of the things, especially with Palpatine, that comes through is, you do see the magic stuff like that, but there's also this science, right? Like it's like everything is a little magic in Star Wars, right? Lightsabers or this, but they're also pieces of technology, and you see the same thing with the Sith or just dark, stuff like if an object is doing something unnatural, it's imbued with the Force. It's or whatever. There's something real, and the same thing with that, with the rituals of this, that, and the other, and conventional cloning, and going out and all that stuff. And if we think of historical analogs to that, we have our good friends, the Nazis, right? So that's another thing that kind of brings that in there. The whole occult thing, which obviously is explored mostly in Hellboy, which is
right, but also there's strong mentions of it in Raiders of the Lost Ark. Right,
because they're looking for the Ark, they're looking for the Grail.
There's also there's obviously evidence that the Nazi war machine was looking for any edge, including a lot of really weird occult things. you know,
Right.
to the extent in that we see in media, probably not. I don't
No.
think even as delusional as or as insane as Hitler was, he thought that like he was
I
going to
thought it
find
was
magic, but
I thought it was Himmler's little thing.
probably it was probably more him.
With the SS, so that's why there's all that occult symbolism and stuff like that with all that kind of stuff. But yeah. So okay, so we've got what other force powers do we have? I mean, there's force choking, but that's just using telekinesis to strangle somebody.
And we see even good Jedi doing that before they turn to the dark side, and even after, right? I mean, even once they've made the decision to not turn, right? We see Jedi, using telekinesis in a very similar manner to straight up just crush a battle droid into a lump of steel.
So we're on this thing for the dark side, and I do want to bring this up. Maybe we'll finish up the powers and we'll talk about this afterward, but I do want to mention this out there. There's the darkest thing about all of Star Wars to me is the treatment of droids. Every single person, no matter if they're good or bad, completely abuses droids, right? With the exception of little Leia. Right. However, when she was an adult, she took it out on C-3PO a couple of times. But
interestingly, okay, we'll get to that, right?
Yeah, we'll get to that.
Anyway. I think that there's a very clear delineation between how the good guys treat droids and the bad guys treat droids.
Oh, yeah, but neither of them are
particularly good. The other powers we see,
yes,
when you start stepping outside of like the things we see Sith doing, is we get more into like pure sorcery, what we think of as like really our magic. And the Witches of Dathomir are a great example. In various media, they can almost teleport, disappear. You see that occasionally in, or whether or not it's just illusion. Illusion magic is also very, very, very commonly associated with with not only the Sith but the sisters, the Night Sisters.
Yeah. What do you make of the Mortis group?
So Mortis is really interesting in that I think George was really trying to expand his ideas of what the Force was and where it comes from and its ultimate functionality in the galaxy. And I don't know, I like to think of that as like maybe the three, maybe Anakin and Obi-Wan like ate some bad shrooms and were stuck in hyperspace for too long. So I kind of try not to think a lot about it, but the aspects of it, the aspects of the idea of keeping the Force being kind of enshrined as ideals in three individuals is very interesting. I would say provocative in that, like, clearly the brother is evil, the sister is light or dark and light, and then the father tries to keep them in balance. It's an interesting idea, and I think it works, but I think the problem is if you try to make it real versus just allegory, right? There's, it's a lot of it's, all the problem with kind of, I don't want maybe I want to stop that line of thought right there. But the problem is like that no person can live up to all those ideals, right? No person can always be light, right? Because we're human, because we're sentient, right? If you get outside of the idea of humanism, because we're in Star Wars, right? But we're all sentient. So we have emotion, we have decisions, we have choices. We'll be a little selfish occasionally, right? Good or bad, right? And the goal of being on the light side is not succumbing to that all the time and trying to avoid doing that when you recognize you're doing that. Not that you'll never do that. Obi-Wan does that straight up. He's pissed that Maul killed Qui-Gon and he couldn't do anything about it. And he uses, what you find out later on, is like a strike you're not supposed to use. Jedi are not supposed to bisect someone. That is not a point of contact they're supposed to indulge in or focus on in a combat. And he straight up went for the kill. And that's, you know, but he's young and he's hot-headed, and and he was angry, right? And that happens, but he dealt with it, right? He resolved to avoid it, and knew he needed to be a better example to Anakin. He failed, but life goes on. So as far as like the embodiment of light, dark, and neutrality, I don't know. I mean, I personally have a little bit of, I think it's a neat idea that somewhere out there's this tetrahedron it's filled with a couple of people that are, the embodiments of the Force. And if one of them, I think the intention was that like the father was going to pass away, and then like it was up to the light and the dark to fight over each other.
So here's how I was,
without Anakin stepping in.
Here's how I interpreted it. That ultimately the point of that arc was to basically delegitimize the prophecy and say this prophecy had to deal with these three idiots, and everything else is all conceit. It's the conceit of the Jedi. It's the conceit of it's everybody. The fact that even people think of a chosen one in a grand scheme of things. That's what it seemed to be saying that whatever happens with the whole chosen one thing and everything like that, you don't know what's going to happen because it can't be that way, right? And that this prophecy came from this group, right? And I mean, they didn't explain anything like that. I just think that was the kind of point. Right. That's at least what I got out of it. I kind of figured that they were like they weren't actually controlling the Force, right? They were Force users who became so in tune with the Force that they now exist forever and have completely lost all human or whatever, confined thinking. So they think kind of like all over the place. And then, the father was dying and they needed somebody else to come into that position to keep the brother and sister from fighting. And that's what the chosen one was. Another being who was to attain that level of Force mastery who could come in there, right? And that was what Anakin was supposed to be. Didn't have anything to do with it, with all that kind of stuff. That's just all stuff that's been being manipulated by Palpatine. Who knows where he learned it.
Right. The space, right? And that goes back to like, is he using, outlawed rituals, right? That the Jedi can't use to see into the path between worlds to get a glimpse into Mortis. Maybe. But he can never get there, right?
Right.
Maybe that was something that's it. That's an interesting idea. That's the
Yeah, because like everything they do, like it seems like, like you said, like Palpatine, we call him Palpatine and stuff like that, but I think he's really Sidious.
Absolutely.
Palpatine's the veneer,
right?
It's not the superhero. It's
right. Palpatine is,
or it is the superhero. The actual identity is Sidious, and so his concern has nothing to do with politics or anything like that. It's only this generational hatred, revenge, sectarian, right? And we all know that that's easy to find in the world. People who hold sectarian grudges for no reason whatsoever.
Things that they were never even affected by.
Right, exactly.
Personally, anyway.
Yes. Anyway, so should we talk about the droids and trying to integrate people's treatment of droids with a belief in the dark side?
So droids are an interesting subject because they're the thing that you just kind of accept as like, they're machines. Mm-hmm. And I honestly feel the vast majority of them you would not claim as being truly sentient.
Right.
right? They have an AI, they have an artificial intelligence, and they're programmed with characters with mannerisms, but they're not sentient. And I think that a good example of that is that we see R2 and 3PO very specifically go without being wiped for a very long time. R2 for his entire existence, as far as we know, right? His net hasn't been wiped since he left the Naboo, since the probably 1 month before Phantom Menace started, right? When he got his yearly mind wipe, right, for serving on the Queen's ship.
Right.
And right, there's it's not stated in the movies or in much other media, but clearly they developed characters, and Chopper's another good example, right? He served in the Clone Wars, right? And he was, and he has the highest body count of any single character in Star Wars. He has killed more people than Darth Vader, than we've witnessed Darth Vader killing. Right, he's been responsible for the death of more beings than anyone else in Star Wars. Yeah, it's kind of crazy when you look at what he did in Rebels and stuff.
Well,
blowing
but you
blowing
mean
ships up
personally?
and things.
You're not talking about because who do you blame for
The Death Star, right?
the Star Killer blowing up multiple worlds?
Yeah, the entire system. I mean, wiped out an entire system.
Right.
It's crazy.
Anyway, yes, droids. But see, this is my point, right? I think it's a purposeful thing. And I think it's been a purposeful thing since the beginning, right? First of all, the characters of R2-D2 and C-3PO are based on two characters from this movie called Hidden Fortress.
Absolutely.
And these two guys are basically like the droids of feudal Japan. They're
absolutely
peasants, expendable, and they're just thrust into this.
And everybody throughout the
political adventure,
and throughout the entire movie, everybody treats them like, it's like, oh no,
absolute
no,
garbage.
Yep, absolutely, no, and it's like, oh, I'm a soldier. No, I'm not a soldier. Oh, I'm a soldier. Nope, now you're a slave, right? So now you're going to be digging in here. It's like just you got no choice, right?
Exactly.
That. So I think, and even the main characters.
I think George Lucas wanted to give there, and maybe he didn't think of this, maybe he did. I don't know. Maybe this is an afterthought. Maybe this is from Dave Filoni. But it's almost like they've successfully created a kind of underclass.
Absolutely.
Right? That we forgive all of the abuses to them, but deep down, they're poking us, right? Because one of the first things what caught me to the Clone Wars was that they made the battle droids sympathetic. That they were funny and they didn't know what was going on, and they had
religion. I mean, and some of them when they're running are like, oh my god, right?
Yeah. They're just they're and you're like, so on one hand, it's like, yes, expendable or disposable bots can go over there, but on the other hand, you're like, no, although they don't do that with some droids. Like some droids are just
the commandos that are like wearing the clone armor, and there's some of the droids you come across that are they're depicted as violent killing machines, and that's what they are.
Right. IG-88
Chopper
stands there. But yeah. But still, one of the best little kind of off topic episodes of the Clone Wars for me was when C-3PO and R2-D2 have to go out and get Jogan fruit for Amidala's party, and like R2-D2 ends up like going to a robot spa, and C-3PO gets caught by Cad Bane and tortured. It's just like, and they play it for laughs, and it's just like oh my god, these beloved characters, and they're like Cad Bane like tears him apart. It's just and then they flash back to R2 getting an oil bath and being polished. But even with R2, like, even though they give him beeps, like completely inhuman, no speech beeps, there's emotion there. The boo,
Yep.
I don't think that the droids were ever meant to not be sentient.
Well, the main characters, right? I mean, certainly the main characters are intended to be fully sentient. Yes. I think some of the background droids are.
Yes. But so some of the background people are too.
Right, absolutely. Right. They're all the stormtroopers.
All the clones.
Oh yeah, pretty much all the clones. And it's hard to say because you don't really see the Empire interact with droids very much.
No.
Right? They just but they also just kind of ignore them. Right? Yeah. This is a great example in the first movie in the Death Star. All this excitement's overblown the surface, right? They don't even think that there's any level of deception from C-3PO. There's just no chance of it. It's like, oh, they're madmen. They're going down to the detention level. Boom, they just go, right? Take them at face value. I need to take my buddy down to maintenance. He's acting squirky, right? We need to get him checked. Go on, right? Yep. Don't even blink at the droids. Just want, and everybody ignores them. Yep. But you also see other droids just kind of tooling about their business on the Death Star, and like they're just kind of ignored.
They're
by the good guys
like real machines.
Yeah,
like dishwashers and stuff.
And Han, notoriously, as an example, Luke is pretty kindly and gentle for the most part to both of the droids throughout the whole thing, right? I mean, Luke, because like they're he clearly formed a pretty quick bond with them, especially R2, right? I mean, but they're also like R2 gets blown up. Right. And they're like, 3PO's freaking out over it. Right. Any of my circuits or gears will help. And they're all like, I'm sure I'll be fine. Right. Which he is. But, it's like, they're just, caught up in their own human emotions. And, R2 is just kind of, he'll be okay. He's a droid. Right.
Yeah, it's absolutely true. And he plays it up just completely poo poo all of C-3PO's concern, all of his,
But the techs we'll get to work on him right away, right? It's like we'll get him fixed up, right? And some of that is just storytelling, right? You don't want to. You need to acknowledge it as something that could have gone really bad, but you also don't want to kill the moment of the victory, right?
Right.
So there's some of that, but in the second movie, in particular,
choosing C-3PO to say that.
Right, for him to be the one that's really concerned about him,
instead of Luke saying like, "Oh my God, I hope we fix him."
Right, but Luke does acknowledge when they pull R2 out, and he's like, "Oh no," and it's Luke acknowledges it, but he's also quickly much more dismissive than 3PO is. Right. In the second movie, Han treats 3PO, and Leia falls into this a little bit, but 3PO is being pretty annoying, right? But that's his personality. Right. You just got to deal with it. Han treats 3PO pretty horribly.
Oh yeah,
he does take care of him, but throughout the whole thing, I mean, Han seems to have a bit of distaste for the droids, right? I mean, he just kind of, if you pay attention, he just kind of doesn't pay a whole lot of attention to the droids.
And speaking of adding content, if you see Solo, there's a possible reason for that.
Yep, because he's got to deal with the droid that's stuck in his ship all the time.
Right, and I'm sure the Falcon's a little jealous.
Probably.
That's how she was portrayed.
Yep.
Solo.
That's an interesting point. But also, there's a comment and a mention in one of the newer books that the Treadwell droid that you see tooling around on top of the Falcon helping him fix it in Empire was actually Han's droid. It actually belonged to the Falcon. And he had it for exactly that purpose. And he gets killed in the short story trying to help fix the motivator or whatever it is. I don't. There's some of that from a certain point of view stories in the second book were a little weird. But it's basically L3 and like some other droid that's stuck inside of the mainframe of the Falcon trying to help figure out why they won't jump in, and so they're actually communicating with R2 and back and forth, and in the Cloud City computer. But so Han's pretty dismissive all the way through, even to the point of, just being like, well, I guess I can hotwire this thing, right? When R2 gets blown up at the end of Return of the Jedi, right? It's like, oh, I guess I can just do this myself, right? Because R2 can't, he's like this.
Yeah.
Doesn't even concern himself that R2 got blown up.
Yeah. But it's also interesting in the grand scheme of things too. When you think about the ultimate Darksider in the story, Vader, right? If you think about it, Anakin / Vader, I'm trying to rack my brain for anything. He probably treats droids better than anybody, right? And even as Vader, you never see Vader interacting with a droid.
Nope.
He doesn't use them. It's almost like how John Adams who got so pissed that the White House was being built with slave labor. He would refuse to move in for a while.
You do see him use the Dr. Ball torture droid.
That's true.
Right?
That's true. Dr. Ball.
Dr. Ball. He does use a torture droid, but that's a little bit of a maybe a little bit of a different thing, right? And we don't know what kind of relationship he has with Dr. Ball. They might be drinking buddies. Right.
Right. Exactly. Exactly.
We treat him very well, right? We just see him, he brings in the interrogation droid because it's qualified to administer truth serum, right?
Yes. But of course, the real dark side of the entire Star Wars universe, to finish up the hour here, is the complete lack of handrails.
Absolutely. Right? OSHA would be livid.
I mean, how many people in the Star Wars universe just completely perish because they fall into some chasm? Because that's the other thing too, is like the lack of handrails and the presence of chasms.
Yes.
It's like everybody has to have a chasm.
Interesting note. No handrails on the Death Star except in Palpatine's chambers.
Oh.
Right? Because the old man might slip on his cane and fall right down that pit. But there's handrails.
That is correct.
But not on the bridges, not on the.
We found Palpatine's real plan.
That's absolutely
rid the galaxy of handrails and just let nature take its course. All right. Well, we're here at the end of the hour. It was an interesting little meandering discussion, but fun nonetheless. Thanks, John, for coming in and chatting.
My pleasure.
With me. And thanks for tuning in. Enjoy your Halloween. Happy Halloween if you celebrate it. If you're anywhere else in the world, we wish you happy Halloween as well.
Happy Day of the Dead in a couple of days.
Yep, in a couple of days. And All Saints Day. There's all kinds of stuff going on right now. It's the beginning of the holiday season. So enjoy, everybody. So from all of us here at TPLA, Patience, Practice, Perseverance, happy sabering. Okay, you're clear.